up, summer was the season that I lived for. It meant a month away at this place called Sky Lake Yosemite Camp that was just south of Yosemite National Park. This summer I was 14. I was finally old enough for Sky Lake's backpacking trips, and a trip up Half Dome is what I had my heart set on. I begged my mom for a pair of hiking boots. Nope, it's going to be just like that tennis racket that I bought you last year that's still sitting in the closet. Well, 25 years later, and countless pairs of hiking boots later, I've spent the majority of my adult life working as an outdoor educator, mountain guide, and climbing and rescue ranger on 6 different continents. Some years I've spent more nights sleeping on a camping pad than in a bed. Being in the mountains exposed me to a code of conduct completely different than anything I'd ever learned in school or the sports teams I'd played on growing up. The lessons the rocky summits, shifting scree fields, and dusty trails had to share were somehow more concrete. They were more applicable than anything that I'd ever experienced before, and like noble truths or commandments. But instead of taught from a pulpit, they were straight from Mother Nature, taught in a shotgun style that demanded either total compliance or failure. There were the simpler things, like no matter how clear the sky was before going to bed, it was important to bomb-proof camp. With an organized camp, you could sleep soundly throughout the entire night, and if an unexpected storm rolled in, you would avoid a mad scramble in the dark. You needed to deal with the issues early, whether it was a piece of gear that needed repairing, a blister, or a teammate that you had problems with. Otherwise, it would just fester and get worse and worse and worse. Then there were the bigger lessons, like while climbing Mount Vinson, the highest peak in Antarctica, I'd spent much of the previous day over the stoves melting snow for water and cooking meals. The next day I fought through tingling lips and terrible dizziness, headache, and nausea. Altitude illness, carbon monoxide poisoning, or maybe a combination of both, who knows? But I realized if I slowed down and just kept putting one foot in front of the other over and over and over and over again, and forgot about those expectations that I'd placed on myself, I could make it. Just because I didn't feel exactly the way I wanted to, didn't mean I couldn't do it. In Kyrgyzstan, with one of my best friends, Melis, we topped out on a peak that had never been climbed before in a remote area of the Tian Shan Mountains. We'd scoped our descent route carefully from base camp, but by the time we topped out, a storm had rolled in and obscured everything. The summit celebration felt forced as I got nervous and worried about how we'd get back down to camp. But no matter how many times I've had to learn this lesson again and again, I always fail to remember that if you wait long enough, 9.9 times out of 10, the clouds will clear long enough just for a bit so that you can get some clarity. Sure enough, it did, and soon enough, we were safe back in camp. A few years back, I had an 80-year-old client that wanted to climb the Grand Teton. It's a 7-mile hike with a 4,500-foot elevation gain, just the standard camping area at the base of the Grand. Then there's an additional 2,500 feet of rock climbing you need to do to reach the summit. But the trip's not over. You're not done until you've descended 7,000 feet and 7 miles and are back intact in the parking lot. I'd had clients half of Bob's age who hadn't been able to do it for one reason or another. And Bob, who is a hobby rancher from Texas, had never rock climbed a day in his life. But the difference with Bob was how he listened explicitly to my instructions. Whether it was what foothold to use, how to shift his hips, when to drink water, how much, he didn't permit room for self-doubt or fear, and that made all the difference. On August 14th, at 80 years old, Riggs became the oldest person to climb the Grand Teton. For years, the night before heading up a mountain or a rock climb, tossing and turning, worried about what the route might be like, I'd soothe myself to sleep, remembering the lessons I'd finally learned, that if it didn't feel right, I could always turn around and come back down. In most cases, it really was as simple as that. The mountains had given me my mantras, but suddenly they stopped working. Beginning in 2011, my world was turned upside down. I knew I'd been avoiding a major knee surgery for a while, so at 35 I had a partial knee replacement, a metal plate drilled into my trochlear groove and a plastic one on the back of my patella. What I wasn't expecting was a very poor recovery, a follow-up surgery, continued pain, and still yet another major surgery on my horizon. A few days after my knee surgery, I developed excruciating back pain. It was severe sciatica, which for the next year I threw everything at in attempts to cure. Drugs, injections, physical therapy, back pain workbooks, more drugs. You get the idea. Nothing worked. It turned out exercise had always been a stress reliever for me. Between the combination of back pain and knee pain, slow, flat walking was pretty much all that I could do. Meditating, another stress reliever that had been recommended, proved challenging. I signed up for a 10-day meditation retreat, but was declined because I couldn't sit for such long periods and changing position wasn't permitted. Who gets rejected from a meditation retreat? It turns out I had a tethered spinal cord, a fairly rare condition which in layperson's terms was due to a filament located inside my spinal cord getting tangled in a rat's nest. This heavy mess was pulling down on my spinal cord, causing nerve damage. And the tethered cord explains why I couldn't go to the bathroom on my own. I started self-catheterizing multiple times a day. Now I realize some of you might be cringing, TMI, too much information. There's a strange stigma about talking about what goes on down there. It's too close to some of that sexual body part stuff. But that doesn't make it easier for anyone. In my case, I needed not only to get the self-cathing thing figured out, but also how to stay healthy while being in remote mountain ranges and developing countries for weeks on end. Not necessarily what doctors would prescribe. Simultaneous to my own health issues, my dad had been diagnosed with urothelial cancer, ironically a cancer that attacks the cellular lining of the bladder and urinary tract. We joked that with his ostomy bags and my catheters, we could make big bucks on Bard's stock. And as I planned for getting a portion of my bladder removed, after he had had his bladder, a kidney, prostate, ureter, and a few lymph nodes snipped, we wondered if the surgeon might give us discount punch cards. In a twist of fate I'm still trying to figure out. While my dad was dying, I was working out how to find a new way to live, one that didn't involve the rocks and the mountains. The lessons I'd learned from the rocks and glaciers, the one that had guided me for so long, weren't working anymore. I could slow down to a snail's pace, but that wasn't going to change the fact that the summit I was working towards, making it through the difficult days of my dad's cancer, wasn't really one I wanted to reach. No matter how well I dealt with my dad's illness, he'd still be dead when I got to the top. And no matter how scared I was at the idea of the docs cutting through my spinal meninges and detethering my spinal cord, there was no option to turn around and come down. It didn't matter how clear my instructions were. I could not guide my mother, my father, myself out of all the ugly, hard moments that accompany terminal illness. There was no one to lead, and there was no one to follow. While my knee and back kept me from the mountains, running rivers was something that I could do. A few weeks before my pending back surgery, we headed down to Utah's Green River to celebrate a friend's 50th birthday. It was my first time camping while cathing. I was self-conscious about my long bathroom breaks. I was suddenly carrying a purse everywhere. I've never carried a purse. And got a urinary tract infection. The second morning of the trip, rocking and rolling down the river in my pack raft, I felt a surge of nerves as I approached the rapid. I attempted to eddy out to a calm patch of water where I'd be able to see what lay ahead, but my friends encouraged me on. As I bounced through the waves toward the river's horizon and the unknown beyond, not knowing how ferocious or friendly the water would be, but as usual, the anticipation was worse than the reality. I came out the other end all smiles, happy, psyched with the line I had taken. The anticipation was worse than the reality. It hit me. I was learning new lessons, ones much more applicable to what I was facing. Maybe the rapids were where I needed to be looking to for reason. Maybe I was right where I needed to be. On a river, many times you can't see around the next bend or the drop. You're working in the blind. But whether you can pinpoint your destination or not, gravity will conspire to carry you downstream. Granted, it might not be at the speed you desire, and time isn't all that different. Days will pass, even if painfully slow or far too fast, always pushing you toward an unknown, unimaginable destination. I realized that with more time on the water, I'd become less afraid of getting tossed out of the boat and tumbling like a rag doll through the rapids. As I queued up above Hell's Half Mile with our friends, I realized I'd come to accept that unlike in climbing or mountaineering, there's no backing out of a rapid. Once the river takes you, you're committed. There's no alternate exit from the slurry of white water other than riding it out. You'll go in one end and you will come out the other. So you might as well work as hard as you can to stay upright, or at the very least afloat. You don't have control, but you do have choices. And if you do capsize, like I did right before Satan's Rock, you can either panic and thrash around like a wet, terrified cat, try to stay calm and use every tool that you can to make it out alive, or give up and drown. Either way, your body will make it out the other end. If your soul survives, that is up to you. There's a quote I keep within view on my desk. I like it because it reminds me of all the different landscapes out there and all the different lessons to be learned. In Africa, you must grow like the acacia tree, twisted by the wind, but continuing to stretch for the sky. Life is harsh, but it's beautiful. In Spirit of Places, Letters and Essays on Travel by Lawrence Durrell, he lends voice to an essential question coming from the land. I am watching you. Are you seeing yourself in me? Over the last year, my river run hasn't ended. I've had a biopsy for bladder cancer of my own, 2 more surgeries, including the placement of a bladder pacemaker. And in October, my father died after 3 years of fighting. I've been able to return to the mountains. It's at a different pace, but I'll take it. It wasn't something I was sure would happen. But just because I'm back rock climbing, it doesn't mean I'm done with the rivers. Like any good geologist knows, mountains and rivers are one and the same, their existence integral to the other, just like the lessons themselves. Together, the two provide a complete curriculum rather than just a series of disconnected, disjointed chapters. I look forward to continuing on this course and can only hope that if and when the time comes, I'll have the foresight or good fortune to find the right teachers, whether they're the mountains, rivers, acacia trees, sandstone arches, or some other landscape in a land I haven't even yet imagined. Thank you.